Hi, I'm Dan Bouchard Fernandez with Remax Realty Group and Good Vibe Homes. I want to welcome you today to this discussion, Maryland Buyer Agency and Tenant Agency. So this is a concept that is constructed by definition in Maryland law that defines the relationship that a real estate agent has with a prospective buyer or seller. I'm going to start sharing my screen and I'm going to share with you some basic definitions of things so that you can understand how working with a real estate agent in Maryland works. And here we go. So this document, Understanding Whom the Real Estate Agent Represents, was created by the Maryland Real Estate Commission and is designed specifically for informing you as a consumer about what the nature of the relationship works. It's not quite the same as going out and talking and working with a car salesman or the grocery store representative, or it's not the same as going out and working with a doctor or an attorney, but there are some similarities with all of those kinds of relationships. The topic of understanding whom the real estate agent represents begins with a discussion about what a seller's agent is. So in normal situations, in many common situations, a seller's agent, also known as a listing agent, represents the owner of a property. The owner of the property who is attempting to sell their property and places it in the hands of a listing agent or a seller's agent, so that that person can market it and promote it and get the property sold and move it through to a final settlement. So that concept is what is known as the seller's agent, and that is done through a written agreement, a contract, if you will, that describes the duties of the agent involved, the brokerage involved, and the specific seller involved. Well, we have a similar kind of a situation with buyers. And because that relationship with the seller is a fiduciary relationship, meaning there is confidentiality, there are duties that are involved for the performance of how that agent and that brokerage represents that seller. Same thing applies with a buyer. So the relationship with a buyer is also done by way of this agreement. It's defined, and we're going to talk about that here in a few minutes. If a seller has a listing agreement and you as a consumer are speaking to the listing agent, then you are speaking to an agent who has the duty to protect and work for the seller. And by default, what that means is that the duty and obligation for that agent is to work primarily against you. That means volunteering strategic information. That means all of these kinds of things that could structure a deal in your favor as a buyer would be off the table in a situation where you're talking to a listing agent, because that listing agent can only represent the interests of a seller. What we've got here is a situation that's not very fair or balanced, right? So what we want to do is we want to create a balanced scenario where a buyer's interests are being represented by an experienced realtor, a real estate agent, and a realtor if possible. And in that respect, we now create what's known as a buyer agency agreement. So if I happen to be a real estate agent and I work for Remax Realty Group, and another real estate agent from ABC Realty, that's just a generic made up name. So if there may be an ABC Realty out there, I don't know. But for the purposes of this discussion, I'm not targeting that company. I'm just saying this is a fictitious name. So if that agent is affiliated with ABC Realty and I am with Remax Realty Group, and that seller is being represented by ABC Realty, and you approach me and say, I would like to go see that property, and I would like to take a look at that property and possibly buy it. And if we do not have what's called a buyer agency agreement in place, then by default in the law, I am what's called a sub-agent, meaning I am required to also represent and work for the seller. So that's not a great scenario, right, for a buyer to be in. So but I want to go ahead and define that for you. If I'm not a buyer's agent and I'm working with a buyer, then by default, I am a sub-agent and therefore I am working for the seller. Sounds a little complicated, but it really is fairly a simple concept moving, once we get into the flow of things. So the agent who represents a buyer is the buyer's agent. A buyer may enter into a written contract with a real estate broker, which provides that the broker will represent the buyer in locating a property to buy. The agent from that broker's company is then known as the buyer's agent. The buyer's agent assists the buyer in evaluating properties and preparing offers and developing negotiation strategies and works in the best interest of the buyer. The agent's fee is paid according to the written agreement between the broker and the buyer. If you, as a buyer, wish to have an agent represent you, you must enter into a written buyer agency agreement. Otherwise, if not, then that agent must be a sub-agent of the seller and represent the seller's interest. So if you understand what we just talked about, then you probably have come to the conclusion that it's far more preferential for you as a buyer to be represented with a buyer's agent than it would be to talk to a listing agent who is obligated to represent the seller. So let's talk about the next concept, dual agents. The possibility of dual agency arises when the buyer's agent and the seller's agent both work for the same real estate company. The buyer is interested in a property listed by that company. The real estate broker or the broker's designee is called the dual agent. Dual agents do not act exclusively in the interests of either the seller or the buyer, therefore cannot give undivided loyalty to either party. There may be a conflict of interest because the interests of the seller and the buyer may be different or adverse. So essentially what that means is in Maryland, it is illegal for a listing agent to also represent a buyer in the same transaction. However, what this paragraph is talking about is if I'm with RE/MAX Realty Group and another one of my associates from RE/MAX Realty Group or RE/MAX 100, because we're owned by the same broker, if another agent in the company works for is working for the opposite party, then the company is a dual agent, but the individual agents are exclusively the listing agent and the buyer's agent. So each of the buyer agent and the listing agent have their own obligations to their own clients. We have to account for monies that are distributed and spent. We have to honor the privacy and the confidentiality of our clients, and we can't reveal that confidential information to the other side. The broker in the middle obligations to both sides, but generally the broker doesn't get involved in the nitty-gritty details of the negotiations and the details of who's doing what and whose confidential conversation was this and vice versa. So they are somewhat removed, but they're there as a supervisory role. So we've got the listing agent and the buyer's agent doing their thing with their agent, with their clients. And we're not allowed to reveal those privileged conversations that we have with our clients to the other side. So that's a protection there. Now you can agree to have a situation like buyer agency and dual agency in advance. And that's what this form is about. This basically talks about by signing the consent for dual agency form, the dual agent, the broker or the broker's designee shall assign one agent, listing buyer, to represent the seller as the intra-company agent and another agent to represent the buyer, the buyer's intra-company agent. Intra-company agents are required to provide the same services to their clients that agents provide in transactions not involving dual agency. So it's the same kind of relationship that I have as a buyer's agent, regardless if I'm dealing with a listing agent on the opposite side that's in my company, or if it's dealing with another company. Now, it gets kind of tricky when we're moving through this. If you as a buyer don't want to participate in a dual agency situation, then we get stuck in a situation that really may cause some difficulties. If I am representing you as a buyer's agent and I have a property that I'd like to introduce to you, but it is represented by a listing agent within my company, and you have decided that you do not want to participate with dual agency, then we have a problem, because I can't show you that property because it would be in violation of our agency or buyer agency agreement, because you have not consented to dual agency in advance. Either the buyer's agent would need to remove themselves from the transaction and allow you as the buyer to go get another buyer's agent from a different company, or you would choose to change your mind and actually accept the dual agent and work through and show you the property and have you engage with that property. Now, that's a decision that only you can make. I would not be a person to tell you that you should do one or the other. But it would seem to me that if you have interest in a specific property and you understand that the duties and the loyalties are the same thing, are the same duties and loyalties, regardless if the individual agents are involved in the company or if they're involved in separate companies. So in that sense, we can't reveal that privileged conversation to each other. It's up to you. That's where we are. But if we end up in a situation where you want to see a listing that's within my company, then we would come to a point where we would have a decision to make. We don't have to deal with that right now, so we're just going to move on and discuss this. Feel free to read the language here, and you'll get more comfortable with it. Just wanted to cover the highlights. I don't really want to get into too many of the details. So here you would say, we, the buyers, acknowledge receipt of a copy of this disclosure, and that Remax Realty Group and Remax 100 and A. Daniel Bouchard Fernandez are working with us as a buyer's agent or tenant's agent. And again, this applies for tenancy as well. You would sign this document, and that would be it. So that explains how agency works. So the next document that we're going to go to is the consent for dual agency. And this is basically you're agreeing to, in advance, to work with us to not exclude listings that are listed by my company. I mean, most buyers typically want to have all of the options open to them to see as many properties as they can that they have interest in. And to eliminate a property simply because it's being represented by my company, seems to me that it would not work in your interest to not have that, but that's a choice that you can make as well. So I don't place any judgment on that. It's just a decision that you would make. So assuming that you would go ahead and agree to work in dual agency, we would use this form and we would talk about this. So some of the important considerations before making a decision about dual agency: a broker, and that's the person in the middle, or a broker's designee acting as a dual agent, does not exclusively represent either the buyer or the seller. So that's the person up above in the middle. You got the listing agent and the buyer's agent. There may be a conflict of interest because of the interests of the seller and the buyer may be different or adverse. So that's this person. As a dual agent, the real estate broker does not owe individual loyalty to either the buyer or the seller. Before the buyer and the seller can proceed to be represented by a broker acting as a dual agent, they must both sign consent for dual agency, which is this form. If the buyer has previously signed consent for dual agency, the buyer must then reaffirm it. So you're first initially consenting to it here before we found a property, and it's a theoretical discussion at this point. So that's what the purpose of this form is. So here we say you can consent to the written dual agency agreement, or you can refuse to be represented in dual agency. If either party refuses to consent in writing to dual agency, the real estate broker must terminate the brokerage relationship for that particular property with the buyer, the seller, or both. If the seller terminates the brokerage agreement, the seller must then either represent him or herself to arrange to be represented by another real estate company. If the buyer terminates the brokerage agreement, the buyer may choose not to be represented at all, but simply to receive assistance from the seller's agent. So in a case like that, if you choose to not be represented by the buyer's agent in that situation, and you simply just want to be working with the seller's agent, the listing agent, keep in mind and understand that that agent is only representing the seller's interests. So what good does that really do for you? These are just some things to consider. And I understand that these topics may be a little complicated, so feel free to reach out to me and give me a call after you watch this video, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. So I still owe you confidentiality. So I still have the obligations that are reflected to us. So if you tell me I'd be willing to pay $1 million for that house, I can't reveal that kind of privileged information to the other side. But if we are going to be talking about your qualifications to buy the property, you would be giving me permission to give to the other side your lender pre-approval letter, which will spell out what kind of pre-approval you are qualified for in the process, in getting a loan, because the seller needs that information in order to be able to decide whether to accept a contract from you or not. So there are certain things that are kept, we are able to go ahead and convey, and you give us written permission to do that. And then there are other things like privileged conversations, like the $1 million house, that I can't reveal. I can't reveal things like if somebody's going through a divorce, like if you're going through a divorce and you're buying a property, or if there are personal issues, personal factors in your life that you tell me that are not material to the sale, to the transaction, then I cannot reveal that stuff to the other side. So again, if there's any questions about this stuff, feel free to give me a call and I can elaborate a little bit more on that. The seller would accept a lower price or other terms. As a buyer, I can't tell the other side that you would be willing to pay a higher price or other terms. The reasons why a party wants to sell or buy a property, like divorce sometimes is a very, very common scenario. And like if I were the listing agent, and my clients were going through divorce, to reveal that to anybody, that's private information. Or other things, other motivations. Maybe somebody's sick, maybe somebody's in the process of dying, maybe there's who knows what it is, right? But the point is that's privileged information that has to stay with that party, and it can't be revealed to the other side. Or anything that relates to the negotiating strategy of a party. So that's all privileged information. Only the broker receives compensation. So the broker is that person in the middle. Remember, we've got the listing agent, the buyer's agent. So only the broker receives the compensation. And then that broker shares part of that compensation with the agents. That's how that works. If a financial bonus is offered to an agent who sells the property that is listed with his or her broker, this fact must be disclosed in writing to both the buyer and the seller. So if there is a bonus that is offered, then that would be disclosed to you, because that could make my judgment more prone to pushing for that property if there was an extra bonus, in theory. And so that it would be my obligation to disclose that information to you if there is a bonus, in fact. So just so that everybody's aware of what's going on, that's the way that the law requires us to act. So then we have a consent, we sign, and we move on from that. So now let's go ahead and let's jump into the buyer agency agreement itself. So here we've got paragraph 1 and paragraph 2 are the parties involved and the contact information. That's, obviously pretty self-explanatory. The broker is hereby authorized by the undersigned buyers or by the authorized representative of the buyers to represent the buyer as the exclusive real estate broker in acquisition of real property. As used in this agreement, acquisition of real property shall include any purchase or lease of the property. The term seller shall include landlord. The term buyer shall include tenant. So here, what we typically will do is we will go ahead and say the buyer seeks the following type of property. Maybe you're looking for a residential property. Maybe you're looking for a townhouse. So we would articulate that right here. The buyer agency terms and rights. So the agreement shall be effective on blank date. So presumably that would be today's date, and then shall continue until midnight on blank date. So please refer to the specific please refer to the email that will accompany this video, and with the specific information that I've outlined in that email to contain what these dates will actually be in your case. Okay. And we can do that. Now, there are different philosophies. Some agents will go ahead and require a 6-month buyer agency agreement. Personally, I feel that that's a bit excessive. I feel that you don't know me. I don't know you. We don't know how realistic each other are going to be. We don't know how effective each other's are going to be. We really don't have a good foundation of understanding each other and whether or not we're going to work well together. So let's make the concept of timing a relatively short period of time. And if we need more time, we can always extend that time later on. So that's my philosophy, but other agents will approach it from a different perspective. As required under Section 17534, the Maryland Real Estate Brokers Act, the parties agree to the following provision of for termination. So Maryland law is defines that any buyer agency agreement or any listing agreement can be terminated with a unilateral notice. So unilateral, uni means one. So one person in the relationship of this buyer agency agreement can unilaterally decide, I don't want to work with this person anymore. And they do that by in writing, in a printed writing form, say that I want this buyer agency agreement terminated, and that would be the way that we implement that. So it's written out, it's signed either digitally or manually, and that is sent to the opposite party. So I could send that to you effectively, or you could send that to me if we decide that we don't want to work together. In my case, the terms for that termination, what I like to do is I like to make it effective after 7 days. So if you decide today that you don't want to work with me anymore, you can send me that written notice signed, and then from there, it will take effect in 7 days. And this basically just allows a cooling off period, just to allow to make sure that this is the right decision that we're doing. All right, we can't discriminate against people for all of the protected classes that exist federally, statewide, or countywide. And in some cases, even towns have their own anti-discrimination language. So we are obligated as realtors to not discriminate, and the law takes precedent over anything else. We also have a realtor code of ethics that realtors are obligated to abide by. And you can find that realtor code of ethics at NAR at the National Association of Realtors website. And if you Google NAR code of ethics, you'll find a link to the code of ethics there. So if you've got questions about it, feel free to reach out to me, or feel free to reach out to my principal broker, Ken Crowley. All right. The buyer responsibilities. The notice regarding coming soon listings. So essentially, coming soon listings are listings that they're posted in the MLS, but they are not active in the MLS, meaning they're not available to be seen. So they're usually, when they're in a coming soon status, there'll be a date that'll be specified, and it'll say this property is expected to be on active status on this date, whatever that date is. So after that date, we could go ahead and see the property, but before that, we cannot. That's basically what that is. If you happen to see a coming soon listing, then you are agreeing by signing this buyer agency agreement that you're going to use me to communicate with that listing agent. We don't want you to reach out to that listing agent directly for a number of reasons. Number one, because it is you could be saying something to that listing agent that could be used against you. And we want to limit the opportunities for having you give away accidentally some information that could be used against you as either as a negotiating strategy or other things. So, but also we want to eliminate the possibility that that there could be any confusion about who represents whom in the transaction. So stick with me. If you need information, contact me. I'll be happy to get the information as needed and provide that for you as efficiently as possible. If you see signs on a property, real estate signs, please contact me as well. Please don't contact that listing agent for the same kinds of reasons. Same thing goes with new construction builders. Please, a lot of people will tend to want to go to those new construction builders and visit them. Usually when you visit those, they will require you to sign in. When you sign in, please always sign in using my name. So sign my name in the sign-in sheet, my phone number and my email address if that's what they ask for. Don't put your own phone number there because that could prohibit me from serving you in that transaction later on. The same concept applies for open houses. If you decide that you want to go visit some open houses without me present, then please go ahead and sign my name in those sign-in sheets. Don't sign your own name because that, again, could cause problems in my ability to represent you. So that's basically that. Paragraph 7, the broker's responsibilities. I will find properties for you. I will use my best professional knowledge and skills to locate and present real property. But you may find them also from other sources. That's okay. That's fine. There comes finding the real estate property comes from a lot of different sources, and it's a collaborative approach. It's a collaborative effort to find you the right properties. But that's just one very small part of my job. One very small part of my job. I will assist you through the process of preparing documents, guiding you, advising you, counseling you as to where your rights, your obligations, your entitlements are with respect to the acquisition of that property and how to structure that deal. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing in the buyer agency agreement. And I'm going to be representing your interests so that we structure the deal as beneficial to you as possible. Let me step off of this for a second. It is entirely possible for me today to write a contract that is so slanted in your favor that there's no way that the seller is going to agree to accept that offer. Similarly, I could write a contract today that is so slanted in favor of the seller that it would be very hostile to you and not in your best interests. So in our job as buyer agents, our job is to get you to the end, which is to settle on the property and to own the property. So we've got to find that happy medium in there. And with your consent, of course, we don't do anything without your consent, but we have to find that happy medium in there that's going to not compromise too much on your needs and interests, while still keeping the seller interested in you to engage with you in the contract. It's a delicate dance sometimes, and it's something that we have to maneuver through. And sometimes we succeed and sometimes we don't. Okay, so the next section in the compensation, we look to you because this agreement is with you. I'm representing you. My company is representing you. We are looking to you for the compensation because we're signing. This document is being signed with you. So if you're working with a doctor, you're paying the doctor. If you're working with a mechanic, you're paying the mechanic. If it's a lawyer, you're paying the lawyer, right? You're getting the service from them that you're paying them. This has to be a mutually beneficial relationship for us. I do this as a way of living, as my living. I don't get paid a salary. I simply work completely by commission, and I only get paid if the deal is completed. So that is the nature of how we get compensated. So my compensation fee will be stipulated and written in the email that I'll send to you when you receive this email, when you receive this video. My compensation will usually include a number, a percentage number, and then a special fee that will also be attached to it in conjunction with that. And that fee is for technology purposes. So we use that to pay for some of the technology expenses that we have in getting you through to this to the end point. So please refer to the email to understand what that specific number is. But be aware that whatever that number is that is written in there in the percentage is also reflected in the MLS. And well, actually, before I get there, so if you may have some concern right now about, well, gee, I don't want to have to come out of pocket to pay this buyer's agent because I don't know if I can do that. And that's a legitimate concern, because the lenders will not allow you to finance the compensation that we get as buyer's agents. So one of the things that is allowed here is that the compensation shall be deemed to have been earned under these circumstances. And then under the next paragraph, we see here that the fee paid by the seller, the broker is authorized to receive compensation from the listing broker. So in this case, remember we were talking about my broker and I was the buyer's agent here, right? So this paragraph is talking about my broker can receive that money, okay? And then if there's a listing agent or a listing broker on this side over here with maybe it's ABC Realty or whatever, then that broker there can offer the compensation to be paid. So the broker is authorized to receive compensation from the listing broker. So the buyer's broker can receive the compensation from the listing broker. The listing broker gets their compensation from the seller. And so the seller can authorize the payment to that listing broker. The listing broker can offer to pay it to my broker. My broker pays me. That's how it all works. Compensation may be offered from the listing broker to the broker. So from the listing broker to the buyer broker. That's basically what that means. It doesn't specifically say that in the sentence right here. So, but that's what it means. The capital B here in this paragraph means my buyer broker through the multiple listing service. And the way that you see that is in any listing, you'll see, and this is just an example here with, this is another listing that is within our company. And you'll notice here in this field, in this category right here, I'm going to slide this over a little bit. You'll see here that this says 35%. So in this particular case, this is a rental listing. So in this particular case, this is a rental listing, and the rental, the owner of the property has authorized the listing agent, Mandy, and the broker, my broker, Ken Crowley. So it happens, this would be a dual agency situation in this particular one. And has authorized an amount to be paid to my broker, which would be 35%. So if I were the tenant agent in this scenario, tenant agent or buyer agent, we would be entitled to receive 35%, which would then be applied to the paragraph that exists up here where we just talked about. So that would be that. Now, and so that would be that. So in most cases, in many cases, the fee that is offered here is at least as much or is greater than the fee that is discussed here. So my fee tends to be a certain amount here. And then this fee is the amount of money that would be paid. So this, if my fee ended up being lower than this fee, then the seller's compensation would cover the entirety of your obligation for my fee. Now, if this number here was lower than this fee, then we would have to have a conversation between the two of us to decide where that extra money, where the difference of that money would come from. So, that's where that goes. So please refer to the email that will accompany this video for the specifics about what my fee will be in this section. The next thing is that if I show you a property today and our buyer agency agreement expires tomorrow, let's say. And maybe in a week from now, you decide, you know what? I know our buyer agency agreement term expired, but I still would like to buy that property. Then this period of time here would cover our relationship, because I already showed you the property when we were in a buyer agency agreement. The buyer agent agreement stopped. You changed your mind. You decided later on that you did want to pursue it. You would then come to me and say, Dan, can you please still represent me and write this contract for me? And I would be happy to do that in that kind of a situation. So the period, the window there is a cushion window, because it's just a fair, it's a fair provision that basically says, okay, I showed you the property, therefore, because I showed it to you, I should still be entitled to receiving compensation for, right? So again, we've talked about the fee paid by the seller, so that in many cases will go ahead and eliminate your obligation to pay for my fee in the other document that we just were talking about. Okay, so let's continue on moving down. Limitations of brokers. So I am not a tax advisor. I'm not an attorney. I'm not an appraiser, a surveyor, structural engineer, certified home inspector, or other professional services. If you would like the services of those kinds of specialists in the transaction, you know, I have some knowledge about a lot of these areas of expertise, but I'm in no way, shape, or form an expert in those fields. We will go ahead and help you as much as we can, but ultimately we'll be directing you to those kinds of specialists if you need that kind of attention. It's entirely possible that I could be representing you and another buyer or a tenant for the same properties that we're looking at the same time. Highly unlikely, but it's entirely possible. Just be aware that that is a possibility. Once we enter into a contract on a specific property, we're not obligated to continue to work and look for additional properties. And as a matter of fact, if you are under contract, then you really need to start focusing your attention on that property and stop looking elsewhere for the what ifs, and maybe there's something better. You need to be very sure, once you've committed to a property, that truly is the property that you want to pursue. If you have doubts about that, then we probably need to have that conversation to make sure that that's really the contract that you want to pursue. Because if you don't, the sales contract is a legally binding document, and there are serious repercussions of it if you don't do what the contract says. So I'll make sure that you're aware of all of those provisions as we move forward, but just be aware that we need to, once we focus on a specific property and we get that contract ratified, we need to stop looking at the others. Ministerial acts. So if I handed somebody a key to a property, that could be considered a ministerial act, because it doesn't conflict with my duties to you as the buyer's agent. Or maybe I'm handing somebody a pen, or maybe I'm delivering paperwork to the other side. Just because I deliver paperwork or do something ministerial, simple, that is not in conflict to my duties to you, and that's a ministerial act. So that's authorized. That is, I am allowed to do that. Confidentiality of offers. Buyer acknowledges that the possibility that the sellers or sellers' representatives may not treat the existence or terms and conditions of the buyer's offer as confidential. So I will treat everything confidentially. But if you're going to be buying 123 Main Street, the seller could very easily go out and start saying, hey, you know, you, Mr. or Ms. Buyer, are buying the property for, and you're willing to pay, you know, $1 million for the house or whatever. They could be doing that if they wanted to. And we don't have an ability to control that. Be aware that you need to advise yourself and keep yourself informed about flood insurance. FEMA has the website here that talks about the flood insurance program. Please go to the flood insurance maps that are provided by the state of Maryland in the link here. to familiarize yourself with that, because flood insurance has a big impact on insuring the property for sale. And the mortgage lender will require flood insurance if it falls within a flood zone, or a flood risk property. So just be aware of that. Buyers hereby advised or notified that the repairs to the property may require that the individuals engaged in to perform such repairs must be duly licensed. So we'll go ahead and try to make sure that we ensure that the repairs that are done, as much as we can, are fully licensed, and then we will notify you that notify you in the instances where that is not possible. Legal construction. The agreement is binding upon the parties, their personal representatives, their successors, heirs, and assigns. That's standard legal. That's very common legalese. If this agreement is signed by more than one person, it shall constitute the joint and several obligations of each. So both of the signers are obligated to perform on all of the terms in this buyer agency agreement. We will then check off the box for the consent for dual agency. And the rest of these, and then the notification for dual agency within a team will not apply in our case. But the disclosure of licensee status addendum. So let's say that the listing agent is also the seller of a property. They would be required to disclose that here. Or let's say that I am related to you as the buyer's agent. Perhaps you're my brother, my sister, my husband or wife, or something like that. I would be required to disclose that information to the other side of the transaction. So just be aware that that would be in there. And then if there's any other special considerations that we would be handwriting in here, that's where this would appear. So this is basically the nature of the relationship and how it works. I've got other videos that will be produced shortly to roll out some of the other details. If you have any questions at all or need any further assistance, please reach out to me in the links below, and we'll be glad to answer any questions and work through you from there. Thanks. Take care. Have a great day.